Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Mr. Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do on Monday afternoons to try and figure out the future of smart buildings. So glad to have you with us today. If you're wondering who we are, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. And also just to point out that views expressed here during this call are personal, not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind, and let's make this interactive on the Zoom chat. It's always much better when we do that, especially today, where we seem to be a little light on the panel side. And also the slide deck is available on Monday Live, the material we're presenting. So this being November, we have been talking about how software is eating buildings, which is a play on Marc Andreessen's article of several years ago about how software is eating the world. So this is a subset of the world. So that's the whole theme of it. Today we're going to do our normal chit chat and talk about how open software, how software fundamentally enables value creation, just sort of that sort of the dimension of how it creates the benefits for all of us, and have a discussion on that. But before we go there, I'm going to hand it over to Ken Sinclair for an update from Automated Buildings.
Thanks, Anto. We finally got our programs together for. We always had them together, but we were just trying to get speakers confirmed, and we're now be able to report who we've lassoed and is actually speaking. Our theme for AHR Orlando is scaling up. We see that that's the big significant thing that's happened since last year is this whole cloud AI interaction is allowing us all as industry to take on bigger tasks with less people, so we can actually use technology. It's either you invest heavily in technology or talent, and the correct solution, I believe, is the combination of both. We started the whole new automated buildings as a library of new technologies, and I'm now seeing that that's rapidly evolving to a who's who of new technologies, and who's basically pushing and actually creating change with these technologies. And I'm actually seeing going forward, that's probably going to be our value. It's just identifying all the people. Anyway, so our first session in Orlando is scaling up. We're just going to do some chitter chatter and pull together a whole bunch of the pieces. And now the next one is, this was our sold out one. Can autonomous buildings become a reality with AI? When we were in Chicago, we had the full room, and actually the discussion in the corridor was, I don't know what was going on in the room because I got stuck in the corridor, but there was enough people in the corridor that there was a good session going on in the corridor. So there's a lot of interest in that, and we would anticipate the same thing in Orlando. And you see there are a lot of our Monday Live people, and Tracy and Keith, and of course Harvey and Turner to add to it as well. So I think that's a great session. Another one that we've got that we're really proud of is our Scaling Your Business with Cloud. And we again, you see Rick is going to speak to that, and we're pleased to have Rick do that. And I think he's going to chat a little bit about where he was in Salt Lake City and what that was all about as well. So lots of changes, a lot of bringing the faces of the industry all together on automated buildings. The open is the key to software eating the building is open. We turned it into a bit of a question. That's basically a summary of last Monday's Monday Live. I think AI did a reasonable job of plucking out the essence of what was said, and we're pleased with that. It's had a good run on social media as well. Another one just by one of our sponsors, the evolution of BMS industry, which roles will be significantly transformed. That was kind of an interesting article. So that's there if you want to click on it. So lots of changes, lots of melding of the industry, I think, is coming. We've got some new advertisers that are coming. It's interesting that the people are becoming the constant. The technologies are changing, but the people who have been kind of leading the technologies, they're quick to adapt new technologies. We've got companies coming and going. We've got companies partnering. One thing that I'm observing is that it's a lot easier for companies to work together now, and they can quickly identify what piece of the technology another company has that is better than theirs, and they can kind of build together an offering. And they can do it so quickly that they actually can do it on a project basis rather than a lifetime commitment. So just the what we call it, just the flexibility to create and more than creating relationships, to actually leave relationships. So it allows them to kind of come up with the best of breed, and we're starting to see a lot of that happening. So what's happening a lot on our site is the people on the site are actually interacting with each other. When sometimes I see a post and it involves 3 or 4 of our sponsors. So I'm really pleased that that's all kind of coming together. Back to you, Anto.
Just before you do, I want to echo that one, Ken. That's something that I'm seeing changing over the last few months, a year or so, in that folks that we've been dealing with before, that was kind of like, this is ours, this is yours. There's a lot more discussion going on about what parts do you need, what parts can you give me, breaking it down into the components, discussions going on, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that being an interesting observation from Ken. So double observation.
I don't think we've seen, people are actually cooperating. Oh my God. Can you believe that? And actually admitting that, wow, your peanut butter is better than mine, and and we'll put it with my jam, and are also it's being accepted by systems integrators, and it's being accepted by owners. I think before that was such a foreign concept, and I think some of the work that Rick has been doing, leading us off into the Coober country. Anyway, that is changing the thinking, and we're starting to think more like software people than control people.
Yeah.
And a lot of my discussions, when we're talking more and more cloud, AI, how are you using these things? And again, they can pick this stuff up and create a new version of themselves, and everybody understands that you may not be completely latched to that, and we will keep modifying it. So I think what I'm seeing is a movement away from buying into strong technologies and trying to buy into people that you actually believe can create the solution you're looking for.
Yeah, interesting. And this is actually the topic of today, so I'm sure we'll dig into that quite a bit more.
Yes, that'll tie in great with the value.
Yeah, exactly. So the link board is, as always, it's up there, and we're still working on the Smarter Summit 25, which is happening on the Sunday of AHR. in Orlando. So that's happening. We just don't have the slide up here yet. Anything else from anybody else before we move on? Hearing none. So let's get back into how software is eating buildings. So just as a sort of reminder of what we've been through this month, we started the month talking about what makes up a smarter building dish, as it were. What are the concepts? What are the things in that in a smarter building when it comes to software? And it's everything from system of systems, digital twin, sort of thinking about a subscription model, open source, AI, obviously cloud native, which is how you sort of, is the edge, is kind of the edge of the cloud is basically where the buildings are. It's kind of the way we think about it. And orchestration is kind of the way you assemble the dish, as it were, more like a salad bar than it is to order a Caesar salad. I think that was all thanks to Alan. And then last week we talked about the various types of open in the software world. And we came up with these sort of 4 different areas, and the highlighted yellow items are the items that were not on the slide before last week, and this came up in our conversation, so I've added it here. The 2 main ones are open data standards and open commerce, which is really to do with open distribution and marketplaces. So that was a really interesting conversation. So today we're going to be talking about how does open software enable value creation, which in a way we've already started that with what Ken was talking about. And so I did a little bit of research and came up with the sort of these 3 big buckets. The first bucket being sort of the economic side of things, which is obviously an obvious one for value. And the topmost thing is cost savings. Open software, or specifically open source software here, can potentially reduce the development cost and therefore reduce the licensing cost of systems or of software, and ultimately to lower the cost of ownership, obviously of the software, but of the systems that the software is supporting as well. So there's a lot behind that. There's a whole sort of area in economic value in terms of growing businesses and growing business opportunities, in terms of looking at new business models and job creation and making workforce more efficient. And then there's a whole sort of argument about avoiding vendor lock-in. That's another sort of opportunity from in open software, especially with interoperability, to be able to be independent from a single vendor. That's obviously for a building to be independent, and to make sure that there's interoperability of the data and apps across multiple vendors. So these are kind of the economic values. The second bucket is in the fundamental technologies and the operational benefits. There's a lot of innovation and collaboration. That's what we were talking about earlier. And sort of accelerated problem solving. So rather than having to build everything yourself, it's become much easier to look for things that will actually complement what you do, and then partner, and then you solve multiple problems. Also here in operational benefits is the customization and flexibility. Obviously software, especially open software, especially if it's modular, has enormous amount of flexibility. If you don't like one piece, then you can change it for another piece. We've had a few of these situations in the IBB that we've picked a piece of software, and down the road we didn't think it was actually the best one, so we changed it, and everything just rolls along just fine. And then the other thing, which I'm glad Ken has identified it as a key theme for AHR, which is scalability, because we need things to scale. Security and reliability is another sort of benefit of open software, and sustainability and longevity. This is really sustainability of the technology and everything else, because it can morph over time and reduce impact, reduce any sort of negative impact on things going away. And there's a whole bunch of economic and social impact, which is much bigger picture. Maybe the top one here, empowering ecosystems, is again another way of thinking about the collaboration side of things, and providing owners a choice of solutions is another thing, which again is very similar to what you're talking about, Ken, especially in projects. But maybe a project can actually be executed by melding a few vendors and a few apps and together to actually solve the problem, rather than having a monolithic piece of software to solve the problem. Skill development as well, and the globalization side of things, which again Ken has brought up, pointed out several times over the past few weeks. So that's my starting list. I'm sure it's not complete, because that's why we bring it up here, to fill in the missing pieces. So what resonates with you guys?
Actually, I just like to wedge one thought in there while you're on that slide. The other thing about scaling is we talked about scaling ourselves, but I think another discovery was that we've never had the scale to put 1,000 man-hours of software into something. But when we start taking software that is being used for many other applications in the Linux kind of environment, we inherit that. So we actually, the scaling is a concept that we're now able to do, but we now can reach out and grab the scaling that we needed, because we can share software, the man-hours of software that we could never really justify. But if it's used for something else, then it becomes, once it's developed, it becomes kind of free. I didn't say that very well, but I think you understand the concept of what I'm talking about. The scaling is in two directions. It's the ability for us to scale, and it allows us to touch people who scale.
Yeah, good point. Good point. So Rick, why don't you start?
So as some of you know, over the last, or a couple of days last week, 3 days last week, I was in Salt Lake City attending the KubeCon, CNCF Con, which are they're annual Linux gatherings of the CNCF community, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation community, and specifically a bunch of companies and individuals that use Kubernetes as core part of whatever their software tool is, or what they're using as an end user. And as some of you saw when I was there in one of the buildings, I kind of showed the camera around, and there's just tens of thousands of people there that are advocates and users, or developers of, or sellers of Kubernetes and CNCF based products. And when Ken talks about hey, we can leverage software that was maybe developed for a different industry, and we can use it over here as a building block for our industry. That's exactly what those tens of thousands of people are there in that room to say they can do. And they're excited about bringing everything they've learned to do for other industries in terms of tool sets and new capabilities for application development or application integration. They're all there to say that their product can help us with a shortcut to becoming a more digitally effective industry. And it was stunning, honestly, to watch the keynotes, to listen to the presentations from all the biggest companies you've ever heard of, whether it's NVIDIA, IBM, Red Hat, Oracle, Microsoft, on down the list, all these huge companies, then hundreds and hundreds of smaller companies that you've not heard of. for them to talk about how they are impacting other industries already and helping other industries, other players in other industries scale, and how excited they are to turn and use some of those best practices and known accepted cybersecurity tools, telemetry tools, security, all the different sort of technologies to apply them to our space. It was quite overwhelming. So what they need is our leadership of like, where to go, what to use these tools for, and where they can have an impact. But because they're being so successful in other industries, they've got no lack of confidence and excitement about what they can do for this space.
So I've got a question. Can you hear me all right, Anto?
Yep.
Okay.
There's two of you, so
Yeah, I appreciate that. As you know, I'm
no worries.
trying to overcome the challenge with my microphone on my laptop. So my question to everyone from our side of the coin here is it fair to say that the companies that have been supplying product to the smart building industry have historically used little in the way of open source software and have not really had a culture within their software teams, their software development teams, around the use of open source software. And as a result, for them to, both at a practical level and at a management level, to understand the value, Rick, that you were asserting based on all these companies that attended this event, is that we have as much a cultural challenge as we do a technical one. Is that a fair statement, do you think?
I'll weigh in on that. I would say that these people with their new digital tools are also saying that every other industry has a challenge of accepting and moving out of the walled gardens and realizing the value of open source. Every one of them has had the same challenges and still is having the same challenges. We're not necessarily ahead or behind. The other key thing is, and this is coming from people who've been using Kubernetes. Kubernetes, by the way, is exactly 10 years old this year. So it's not been around for a long time. The acceptance of it has almost been like a switch was flipped. And this was said multiple times from the stage, that the capability all of a sudden was like overnight adopted and understood as one of the key technologies. And so all of a sudden CNCF went from, cute to dominant. And so they talk about the fact that it's happened really, really fast. So that's where I say, I'm not sure we're really far behind in the adoption of some of this stuff.
But there's a lot of difference in the culture between what you saw in Salt Lake City compared to what, let's say, Anno and I, when we were together working at CSI, were doing, right? The way you develop software and the way you even think about software is very different.
That's what I'm trying to get to, Anto, is that cultural aspect. And I think it would be helpful if Anno could also weigh in, because he's on this topic.
Yeah, I think, Anto, you said, that was back in the day, but that's changed dramatically, right? I think the cultural, and I was mentioning that earlier too, right? The cultural, there is, even in large corporate organizations, the culture is changing pretty quickly as far as acceptance of tools like Kubernetes. You know, we're all Kubernetes based. Everything that we do all runs on Kubernetes, because it just makes sense. And Rick, it was kind of interesting you say, you know, like it's accepted overnight, even though it's been around for 10 years, you know. It's one of those famous quotes, right? When they asked the sports guy or the artist, you know, what's it like being an overnight success? And he goes, like, I've been doing this for 10 years, but now everybody recognizes me, you know, type of deal. It falls into that, and you know, crossing the chasm stuff, right? There's always the early adopters, and we're moving into the, and I think that's what changes things, right? When you do move from the early adopters into the mass adoption, it feeds on itself. At that point in time, right? It's always hard getting past that early adopters, folks. But once I see you doing something, Anto, I'm like, well, hang on, I better take a closer look at that, right, and see what's going on, which then feeds on itself exponentially in that process. But I do see the cultures have changed in adopting tools. You know, to your point, the in the early days, the problem with open source and open approaches was, well, where's my IP? Where's my value? What value am I bringing? And it was very IP centric type approaches. Right. And now it's more about what value am I bringing? What's the impact of what I'm doing going to bring, right? And I think that's the cultural change I see, you know, especially getting in large organizations. It's stop rebuilding stuff that's already been built. What can I do to make an impact with the stuff, right? And how do I differentiate myself?
Yeah, to that point, Anno, I think the open source really speaks more to software infrastructure, if you will, how basic tech, how various, you know, data is shared and transmitted and manipulated. It's not specific to the application context. And that's its value in terms of the, not just the cost savings, but the innovation and collaboration piece on this slide, is by giving up on the idea of reinventing wheels. Look for what wheels are already out there to solve that software infrastructure challenge you might have, and you might very well discover that it's already there in the open source community. You don't have to go create it, right? And that just solves your immediate problem, so that you can just move on to developing the application use of that code for the problem you're trying to solve for your customer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that was the point. To echo the point, right? Yeah, use it to make the impact, right? As opposed to using it for the sake of building intellectual property, to your point, right? I'm just, I got to reinvent everything because I have to own everything so that I'm secure for it. As opposed to, no, let's focus focus on the outcomes, right? What are delivering? To your point,
yeah,
infrastructure
right.
stuff these days. Take the best of the breed, right? That's out there.
Because
I think we also, sorry.
If I go back to, you know, back in the good old days, I know, back then, if you needed to do something new, let's say you have a piece of software, it's a pretty significant piece of software like a supervisory system. If you wanted, if there was a need for something new, you basically have to make the decision of spending potentially man years developing it because it does not exist. And if it did exist, it may be in a competitor or it may be somewhere else that is really incompatible. So it's just as hard for you to bring it into your software to make it work. Right. So it just becomes really, really expensive because there's no way of doing that. And the sort of the Kubernetes kind of the composability of everything in the cloud native world means that the availability, the fact that that thing is there and it's available is one thing, but it's also easy to also plug into your system. So you don't have the sort of huge overhead of creating custom interfaces and doing complex sort of
Yeah,
integration.
but that's a function of the people who built those platforms, right? And
Yes,
they recognized that they wanted to be able to do that, so they made it easy for me, right?
right.
And so,
But everybody's behaving that way. But everybody's doing it.
How do I make it easy for you to play? Right. That's really the focus of. And again, back in the good old days, we didn't have a lot of choices, Anto.
Yeah.
Although I do remember it was weird how blithely we just accepted, oh, we'll go build it as an answer, right? Engineers were just like, oh, we go build it as an answer. That just seemed to be an off the cuff answer, and we just said, okay, sure, you're the guy. So today that's getting challenged a lot more. It's getting challenged a lot more with what really should I build that, or is look, I can find a simple Google, I can find 3 solutions, right? Why are we doing that type of deal?
I think another one we struggled, we thought we had a problem because we couldn't find people to replace us in the industry that thought like we did. And I think that's now turning into an opportunity because we do not want people who think like we do, because it's changing that rapidly. And you said the 10-year window, typically new people we're bringing into our company grew up in that 10-year window. And when they arrive, they ask, why are you doing what it is you're doing the way you're doing it, in real clear terms? And that is the evolution that is going to occur. And this combination of tech and talent, the fact that we cannot get people who think like us, I think is turning into a huge opportunity. And the people we can get have grown up in that open software environment, and they come with all those tools. It's easier to teach them what it is we need to do than for us to reprogram, retool us old guys. That's just my shot from the hip.
Jim, do you have thoughts? Because
I do.
you built some software.
I think that I basically take what everyone has already said as a given. I think that open source has actually been here for some time. We're starting with Linux and making broader progressions. But from a development standpoint, from a technology standpoint, from my point of view, it's a done deal. What's not a done deal is the value creation for owners and on the business side. Where we're largely in an industry where people are still selling IO points, or, the economics of building automation are sold in traditional bid and spec contracts where people count up the number of IOs and multiply by a number. We haven't changed the equation of how open derives value to building owners and what those use cases are for that value. And most importantly, from the owner's standpoint, how they are going to pay for those value propositions. But once again, we have a disconnect between construction of buildings and operation of buildings. So a lot of the operational benefits are on the operating side, not the construction side. So we basically have 2 value buckets, 2 worlds, which I would say that the technology is wonderful, but it hasn't helped us span that gap particularly.
Rick, do you want to comment on that and some of the stuff that you're seeing in terms of how the whole life cycle is being thought about anyway?
Yeah, it's we're at the front edge of seeing what the impact of a kind of new digital, the digital expectations, digital transformations, technology businesses. We thought that we're a technology business. Hey, we did DDC, 40 years ago. But this new technology revolution, or this new digital revolution, is, again, it's happening in all industries, and it's happening with the, as a mindset and a cultural difference of the new digital generation versus whatever we were or are. And so business propositions, the expectations, and the way to articulate the value is just now being formed. And there still is this kind of murkiness and darkness. And what, we hope to do with what we're doing with the Linux Foundation and C4SB is to show, hey, here's a way, here's a approach, technology stack approach that can be a framework or a straw man for getting your product to be more compatible with these new tools. We're at the front edge of that, and we've been able to articulate what the value would be to owners if we could make digital decisions, if we had integration. Heck, we were able to do it 15 years ago. All of us on the call talk about it. We were able to do integrations and smarter decisions the hard way for the last 15 years. But it was the hard way. It was expensive. It wasn't standardized. It was bespoke and one-off. It's easy to talk about what the value was, but it was hard to then point to how the actual implementation was standardized, secure, cost-effective, repeatable, attracted talent. Those things have all changed dramatically in just the last couple of years, or maybe even the last months, depending on which industry you're in.
So where do we go? How do we sort of refine this sort of value conversation? I don't know, David, do you have any contribution to chime in? If you're there. It's not there.
You gotta give me like a 1 minute to like wake up. No,
Wake up.
it's interesting because value story is of course important to be able to sell and to get owners to wake up to the opportunities, but the value is, I think, with open software, it is the gateway to integration and data exchange. And it's the integration and the data exchange that really creates the value. So the open software is kind of a gateway to accomplishing all of the other goals. And what's interesting too is about the open software, it also makes the development of new tools a lot more reasonable. And I don't think that's emphasized on the slide enough, but you can spin up an amazing thing in a day and start testing. And that's primarily because of a combination of open software tools and the cloud services and the cloud service providers. And so this open software actually enables a more rapid failure rate and iteration to get to something that's truly useful. And that means economies of scale. You can develop much more complex, much more functional software in a greatly reduced amount of time.
But how does that get appreciated by owners to the point that it changes the dynamics of how they think about software? Because
it all boils down to how are they going to make more money with their buildings? And from an investor standpoint, I mean, when you look at the CFO who, or the COO, they're looking at how do I, optimize my real estate footprint and lower this cost to the company and therefore increase profits. And so they have one driver there, but then when you look at the investment funds and the real estate investors who own buildings, they don't give a shit about open software or anything. They will start to pay attention when you're able to reduce headcount and the property management cost per building goes from 2.5% to 1%. Then they'll wake up and care. Open software is a gateway to getting to that. Or if anybody wants to, debate that with me, I'd love to be wrong, but that's my hot take on the situation.
I think the other place we need to look for value is we need to look at these leaders using these open software concepts and how did they achieve value? How were they able to justify 500,000 man-hours to build some of this stuff? And how did they get value? So I think we have to, again, that scalability to reach into that large scale. And how did they create a whole new environment and a whole new way of doing things? Because I think we're always thinking in traditional terms. We're trying to replicate what we're doing. What if what we're doing isn't right? What if there's a better way of doing what it is we're doing? And I think we're on the edge of that. And so I think spending some time trying to determine how value has been created, how did this 10-year phenomena occur? Why did it occur? Somewhere stuff, I think where Rick is going is there's gold in them Dar Hills.
Anto, can you put the slide back up, please?
One way I was looking at this slide is how much of this becomes either really, really hard or impossible to do without software that's open, inherently open. I'm not sure how useful that is to do. And Kimon has brought the point of sort of waterfall development versus agile. And I know he's done a lot of thinking on that. So I'm going to bring him on so he can comment on that. Hey, Kimon.
Hi. Hi. Hello, everybody.
Hey. So I think everybody knows you. So speak to us about waterfall and agile and how that makes huge difference.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of government agencies, and we've heard this even from the owners that they typically get into a cycle where they have to buy a monolithic kind of a closed proprietary system, and they want to add another button to it, another feature, and it takes half a year to define the requirements and another year and a half to actually implement it, whatever. It's kind of an exaggeration, but that was pretty much what was happening or is still happening. And to break that cycle, if you think more in agile terms, you don't have to go through these multi-year kind of developments, because now especially it's moving so fast that there is no luxury of saying, well, this is going to be a feature that comes online, next year or a year and a half from now. You need to kind of just turn on the dime and plug in the other module, the open source module, if it is of application functionality. But I think there are not very many owners that realize the difference to that. They're really drawn towards, we need a solution, single kind of a central source of truth, or a centralized system, or whatever the buzzwords they use, that then vendors latch onto and market towards that. And then, in fact, this owner that we worked with, it was a Defense Department, part of the Defense Department, but they basically said they then have to make a decision on one application that doesn't do 100% of what they want to do. It does 80% instead of the other one does 70%. And then over the years, it degrades, and they can't keep up fast enough on the new functionality that's needed. Therefore, they go out and put a new procurement out in 10 years or 5 years and say, well, we have an app that's been legacy and it only does 40% of what we do. So it's just like a vicious cycle that's just wasting a lot of resources, as we all know. And I'm preaching to the choir here, but that's my direct experience, I think. And thinking in terms of agile, adding small pieces at a time and incrementally building up is really kind of the only way to go. And then not having to rebuild things that already exist, which goes back to rely on whatever is out in open source community and plug in the different modules together.
Great
Yeah,
input.
because when you look at this, many of these things and sort of are inherently agile in the way they do things or the way they help. So
Mhm.
maybe that's more of a barrier that people tend to think in sort of waterfall, because people, meaning building owners.
Building owners, the contracting department that's used to contracting like that, throwing millions and millions of dollars away, and then the vendor community that likes the fact that it's closed because it locks them into that solution. Just feeds itself.
So, Rick, is there, are we at the point, because of what you've been doing with the Cloud Foundation, where we can easily define, I'll call it the table stakes, to be such that if a supplier says, I comply with this list of table stakes, that tells the world that I support open. You know, you've mentioned Kubernetes. That's one thing. What else is on that table that needs to be there besides Kubernetes? It would tell owners, would tell engineering firms, would tell channel partners that this is a supplier who gets it. What's the evidence?
So it's funny that you asked it that way, because, or it's great timing. Because I was just going to say that owners are getting more involved in the defining and the articulating that they want to buy from suppliers that are using these approaches, that are using open source, and they are getting. But again, we're kind of on the front edge of it. And I got a chance to talk to this woman who presented she was from Capital One, and she used to work for Google, then she worked for Red Hat, and then she got hired by Capital One to come internally to Capital One to help Capital One figure out how to articulate how the hell to buy what Red Hat and others were selling. And so she went from selling to being the buyer. And she talked specifically about this. And I said that, mentioned this group and said that this is one of the key things that we're trying to figure out how to set standards and how to articulate. This is how I know if you're going to deliver for this vision that I've got. And so I'll say we're at the beginning of that. Now, one of the key things that we intend to do is go back and look at 2525, for instance, the division, the work that a whole bunch of you contributed on it, and how to specify that I want systems that are interoperable. We want to use some of the existing sort of techniques like that and procurement approaches to be able to put some of these new capabilities, whether it is the back end needs to comply with this, the tool sets need to comply with this, the front end needs to comply with that, the integrations need to be opened up this way, the digital twinning process needs to comply with these defined options. We and every other industry are kind of at the front edge of figuring out how to. I got to use my flight simulator analogy when I was in Salt Lake City. Back in the day when we were selling personal computers, the way you defined whether or not you were going to buy a particular technology was whether that technology could run frickin' flight simulator. That was the gold standard for whether something was. And it was kind of funny that that's actually started to show up in specs of does your computer run flight simulator? And then that was proof. Right. What I'm getting at is that we don't have that flight simulator moment yet to be able to articulate what you're asking, Steve. But it's a big part of what we are going to try and do with the help of the Linux Foundation and the way that they've done that for other industries and the work that's being done in other industries. We're going to try and copy and paste some of that flight simulator moment into our domain.
Yeah, that makes sense. And our audience, encourage them to weigh in as well, because what you're right. We're trying to define, like I said, the table stakes, if you will, or evidence that, that the company you're about to work with, has moved in this direction, and thereby is likely not to fall into the trap that Kimon was talking about, of not being able to keep up with the pace of change, and that their software gets outdated quickly, because they didn't commit themselves to this approach when they developed their software to begin with, right? And that gets back to the cultural piece that I alluded to earlier. Is this is what needs to be done, but at the end, the other part though that I think we need to continue to wrestle with here is getting a lot as clear as we can about how we see what it's going to take to solve the interoperability problem fully. Because that's the end game as far as I'm concerned, is that what we're saying is all these different smart building silos need to be able to come together from an interoperability perspective. And how does that statement translate into this exercise that we're doing to leverage open source to solve that problem?
So I think there's two perspectives to that, Steve, that I've seen from our end again. One is there's interest in solving the interoperability from what I would call forward-thinking, progressive end users who've got large portfolios, and and who really don't want to be beholden to any infrastructure per se, and want to go do their own thing. And I get that, right? And they want to be able to pick from all the interoperable solutions. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I do see those end users, building owners, operators, who are more like, that's just a huge lift for me to, even if all the things are interoperable, I have to put it all together. Give me a solution platform that can talk to quote unquote anything out there, but you do it for me, type of approach.
But you do what?
And they want you, whoever the you is, somebody to do it for them. Right.
Oh, right. Okay.
Put it all together.
So that's an opportunity
Yeah.
of an integrator, a different kind of integrator, integrating the functionality and the needs.
Right.
Yeah, I guess that's what people regard MSIs as doing, right?
Yeah, to a degree, but a lot of the MSIs that we know have gone beyond that, right? They say, okay, we'll put it all together, and then we'll do all these other things, and then we'll do all these other things, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's business. That's just making sure you've got continuing revenue from it.
Okay.
It does keeps coming back to, from my perspective, back in the day, we used to have a lot of consultants who would help us and help the client and help the end users define and what they need and how they work, right? And we don't have as many these days for folks to go to.
And the consultants actually need to be a different kind of consultant,
Yeah,
because that's the
to
issue,
what
right?
used to be, in our day. Some of them have kept up and morphed, right, and tried. But there just doesn't seem to be the strength doesn't seem to be there.
I think it's also
you-
important though to find those building owners that embrace what it is we're talking about here and have the appetite and are willing to basically fund the financial risk, I guess. And and I mean that those innovative owners will move the needle more than anything. If we can convince one of them to do a pilot project, and we're starting to see some of that with like what you got going with community colleges in California there, that looks, wow, that looks really interesting. That's a radical. And the other big thing those folks have to understand is that that our procurement methods are broken, and the way we build buildings are broken, and they have to start thinking completely out of the box to change that. And these tools, I think that's where a lot of the value will come, is just doing it completely different. Not trying to justify it in the known environment, but to justify it in the unknown. We need to learn a lot more about what we don't know.
So the procurement word was used and it wasn't Jim.
I was going to say, you're right. I was going to jump on that one as well. It's
So Jim, is there any angle that this could help with that whole thing?
Well, I think there are a lot of angles, and I hope Elon Musk is going to save us by blowing up the federal acquisition regulations. But short of that, I think it's incremental help, but I still think that the major difference is that all the money is on the construction side of the business, and all the value is on the operating side. We've got to figure out a way to bridge that to basically allow owners to get this value.
From a technology perspective, we know the answer to that. I think Timon knows the answer to that, and it's 3 letters beginning with BIM, ends with M. Not sure what the middle letter is.
It's not all BIM. In fact, this reference that I made to the DoD project, it was related to BIM, but it wasn't about BIM, and it was about kind of the culture and the governance and procurement. And they described it as a self-looking ice cream cone, this whole procurement contracting cycle of every 10 years kind of feeding itself. And all the people that are interested in keeping it that way, because there's a lot of vested interest internally and externally. So anyway, I think we've seen that before in other places, right?
Right.
So Ken, do you want to summarize what you've heard here? Picking on you.
Yeah, there was no shortage of thought. It'll be interesting to summarize. Okay, well, from my point of view, because it would be hard to summarize all the points of view, it's certainly a new arena that we're entering, and I think we need leaders. We need strong leaders with financial commitment that are willing to explore where the value is, how we can do things differently, and how we can use this to just come up with a new method of basically building buildings, operating them. And I think maybe inside of all of this is somewhat the possibility of actually pulling the building process and the operating process together. I think medical facilities have always had that problem, is politicians build hospitals, and then you have to go find doctors and nurses and stuff to actually staff them, and the cost of doing that is way more than the cost of the hospital, and there's never any funding for that. So it's a whole separation thing. And I think as we step outside of our industry, we're going to touch a whole bunch of other things, and I think that's going to be quite valuable. Another one that I ran into in one of the discussions I had that I hadn't thought of is a value that we hadn't looked at, and that's to the OEM, the people who actually make the pieces for our industry, that there's probably a better value situation for that, because they have, for the example, if I'm selling a $500,000 chiller, I have a vested interest in that, and for warranty, operation, and any extra information and any ease of bringing that data back will be useful. And then rolled out of the OEM was software companies, which I'd never considered a software company as an OEM. And they're not actually providing equipment, but they're actually providing something from nothing that has a life of its own. And that's kind of an interesting process as well, to kind of think our way through where some of these software companies are going to exactly fit and how much impact they might have. I'm starting on another day's journey, I think. So on that, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ken. All right, it's time to wrap. It's been a really good conversation. Thank you all. Thanks for Kimon for joining us. We'll get the video up in a day or so, and have a great week, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.